Good evening. Authorities locked Bumpy inside a burning building, yet cameras claim he never escaped. How?
Manhattan, New York, Harlem, 11:19 p.m. Thursday, July 14, 1949. A heat wave hangs low over Lenox Avenue. The air smells like gasoline, scorched brick, and old sweat soaked into wool suits. A four-story tenement owned by city contractor Victor Hargreave is sealed from the outside. Steel fire doors bolted, windows nailed shut. Inside, one man is supposed to die quietly. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson is inside that building. That is what the paperwork will say. Hargreave had been precise. He always was. Wealthy, connected, untouchable. The kind of man who believed contracts mattered more than lives. 3 hours earlier at the Sugar Hill Club, he made his mistake. Public, deliberate, calculated humiliation. He leaned close enough for witnesses to hear and called Bumpy a pet Negro with a God complex. Then he laughed. Then he added the insult that sealed his fate. Harlem belonged to men with deeds, not men with muscle. Bumpy did not respond. No raised voice. No threat. He adjusted his cuff. He stared. Silence long enough to register as an ultimatum. At 10:03 p.m., Hargreave's men locked the doors. At 10:11 a.m., they poured fuel down the stairwells. At 10:14 a.m., a match was struck. The building went up fast. Efficient. Systematic. The kind of fire meant to erase problems and leave only ash and insurance claims. At 10:22 p.m., the first patrol car arrived. At 10:27 a.m., the fire department. At 10:41 a.m., the roof collapsed. The official story would later state that Bumpy Johnson never came out. But the fatal problem was documentation, because the same ledgers that proved the doors were locked also showed they were never opened. The guards never moved. The exits were sealed. No witnesses saw him leave. And yet, 6 hours and 43 minutes later, Victor Hargreave's banker would receive a handwritten note slid under his office door. One sentence, written in careful block letters. He does not burn. By sunrise, Hargreave's construction permits were frozen. By noon, his labor crews walked off the job. By nightfall, his brother was found in a Hudson River warehouse with 2 broken hands and a note pinned to his coat. Disrespect has consequences. Bumpy Johnson did not survive a fire. He executed a lesson. And the most disturbing part, the part that still confuses investigators decades later, is this. Every known record, every log, every sworn statement insists he never left that building. The story of how Victor Hargreave lost everything is a warning that history has tried to hide. If you enjoy these deep dives into the underworld, you can support the channel by buying me a coffee using the link in the description. Your support keeps these investigations alive. Now let's go back to July 14, 1949. Harlem, New York, spring of 1949. The war was over, but the city was still divided with precision. Money flowed north after dark and south before dawn. White-owned banks financed black neighborhoods they never set foot in. Deeds were signed downtown. Consequences were handled uptown. Harlem was profitable, but only if it remained controlled, quiet, predictable, obedient. Victor Hargreave understood this arrangement perfectly. He was not born wealthy. He engineered wealth, city contracts, low-income housing, renovation grants that never renovated anything, buildings purchased cheap, insured high, neglected until something unfortunate happened. Fires were common. Inspectors were flexible. Paperwork was obedient. Hargreave did not think of himself as racist. That word was too crude. I preferred realist. Harlem, in his mind, was a resource labor, rent, leverage. The people were background noise. Replaceable. His power came from knowing which palms to grease and which rules to bend. He wore tailored suits even in August. He never raised his voice. He believed this made him civilized. Ellsworth Johnson disrupted that belief. Bumpy was not a gangster in the way newspapers like to explain things. He did not chase headlines. He did not need to. His authority was older than ink. He settled disputes before they became murders. He paid rent for widows when landlords threatened eviction. He decided who sold numbers and who didn't. Violence was a tool, not a hobby. Precision mattered. What unsettled men like Hargreave was not Bumpy's reputation, it was his restraint. He listened. He remembered. He responded late, never early. In a city addicted to noise, his silence felt like disrespect. The Sugar Hill Club was neutral ground. That was the rule. Politicians drank there. Musicians played there. Money changed hands without fingerprints. On the night Hargreave broke protocol, the room was crowded enough to matter. It was just after 8:30 p.m. Jackets were still on. Cigarette smoke hung low. Lena Horne's record skipped once and corrected itself. Hargreave had already been drinking, not enough to slur, just enough to believe himself untouchable. He approached Bumpy instead of waiting to be invited. That alone drew attention. Men stopped talking. They watched. Hargreave smiled. He leaned in too close. His voice was calm, educated, loud enough. He referred to Bumpy as a pet. Said Harlem needed ownership, not supervision. Mentioned deeds, courts, insurance. Then he laughed and added the word that Harlem men never forgot when it was spoken in public. A slur, clean and practiced, dropped like a challenge. This was not anger. This was humiliation by design. Bumpy did not move. He did not blink. He did not correct him. He looked at Hargreave the way judges look at defendants who don't understand the charge yet. Then he adjusted his cufflink. The silence stretched, long enough for the insult to echo back onto the man who spoke it. When Bumpy finally spoke, it was not a threat. It was a statement. You've mistaken where you're standing. That was all. Hargreave laughed again, louder this time for the benefit of witnesses. He walked away believing he had established dominance. What he actually did was confirm intent. In Harlem, intent mattered more than words. By 9:12 p.m., Bumpy's people knew what had happened. Not because anyone panicked. Because information moved faster when nothing needed to be said twice. The insult was public. That made the response mandatory. Not for pride but for order. If Hargreave could speak that way and walk away untouched, every landlord would try it next. Hargreave returned downtown believing he had won something abstract. Respect from men who thought like him. He made calls. Quiet ones, asked questions about a particular building on 131st Street. Old construction, bad wiring, black tenants. Easy to explain later. By midnight, the plan was clean. No gunshots, no witnesses, no confrontation, just fire and paperwork. What Hargreave never understood was the difference between noise and notice. Bumpy Johnson did not react quickly because quick reactions were emotional. Emotional reactions were sloppy. He waited. He mapped consequences. He let Hargreave commit fully to the insult, to the plan, to the belief that silence meant weakness. By the time Hargreave signed off on the fire, the insult no longer mattered. The decision had already been made, and the man who believed he owned Harlem had just scheduled his own erasure. Harlem, July 14th, 1949. The streets were quiet, but the city had a rhythm, footsteps echoing off brownstone stoops. The hum of streetcars on Lenox Avenue. The distant honk of a cab racing toward a late-night fair. Inside 131st Street, a four-story tenement loomed like a tomb waiting for its first visitor. Victor Hargreave had chosen this building for its isolation and its tenants' obscurity, working-class families who would notice only smoke, not intent. The plan was simple in theory. Trap, ignite, and erase. Hargreave's men arrived just after 9 p.m., carrying cans of gasoline and wrenches. They moved with the kind of precision only wealth and arrogance can buy. Locks bypassed, stairwells bolted, windows nailed from the outside. Every exit was accounted for, every angle of escape denied. By 10:03 p.m., the building was sealed. It was airtight, efficient, the kind of fire designed to leave nothing behind but ash, blame, and insurance claims. Hargreave oversaw the operation from his office across town via phone calls to his supervisors on site. He felt safe knowing that paperwork would cover the rest. Contracts, city permits, and witness testimonies were all neatly aligned. No one would question his methods. No one would question him. The first match struck at 10:14 p.m. Flames crept along the hallway carpet with mechanical precision, licking at the baseboards, climbing the walls. Smoke began to fill the stairwells. The fire was designed to be noticed only when it was too late. That was part of the brilliance, or so Hargreave thought. Outside, a few neighbors called the fire department. By 10:22 p.m., the first patrol car arrived. By 10:27 a.m., hoses sprayed water. but access was impossible. Doors were locked, windows nailed. Firemen could only watch as smoke roared skyward, thick and choking. Sparks leapt from the roof. It groaned under its own destruction. By 10:41 a.m., the roof started to collapse, raining burning debris onto the street below. The blaze was perfect, calculated, and deadly, or so the world would later believe. But here is where Hargreaves' understanding of reality failed. He assumed that a fire designed for death guaranteed death. He assumed that locked doors equaled control. He assumed that silence meant fear. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson had been inside all along. The building was not a tomb, it was a stage, and Bumpy was the only actor with the script. He had anticipated the timing, knew the guards' rotations, the fire hoses' reach, and the flammable weaknesses of the stairwell. He had spent decades reading people, predicting moves, calculating mistakes. This was not luck, it was preparation. As smoke filled the hallways, Bumpy moved calmly, systematically. Not a shout, not a sprint. He exploited flaws Hargreaves' men had overlooked. A warped floorboard that concealed a crawl space, a ventilation shaft no one thought to inspect. Every step he took was precise, measured. By the time the firemen sprayed water into the lobby, he was already on the roof, breathing clean air, untouched. Meanwhile, Hargreaves was still smug. He imagined chaos inside, screams echoing, the building fulfilling its promise. He did not know that every move had already been countered. Every calculation had been inverted. By 11:30 p.m., the city believed the fire had claimed its victim. Insurance agents prepared claims. Inspectors signed off on accidental death. Harlem whispered condolences. The irony was brutal. Hargreaves' masterpiece of fire meant to erase a man had instead set the stage for his own unraveling. The building structure, the locked doors, the blazing stairwells, all had been anticipated. Hargreaves had built the trap, and Bumpy had chosen the way out. And within 6 hours, Hargreaves would receive the first warning that his control was gone. A simple note slipped under the office door, written in Bumpy's calm, deliberate handwriting. He does not burn. The fire was meant to be final. Instead, it was the opening act. Harlem's streets, once quiet, now waited for the storm. By 11:45 p.m., the fire was officially under control, though smoldering embers still climbed the walls of 131st Street like silent witnesses. Police reports confirmed what Hargreaves had wanted. No one saw Bumpy Johnson leave. Guards swore the doors had remained sealed. Inspectors ticked boxes. Firefighters noted only a standard blaze, nothing suspicious beyond scorched floors and collapsed ceilings. Every ledger, every log, every sworn statement pointed to a single conclusion. Bumpy was gone, but Harlem did not believe official conclusions. Neighborhood men, women, and boys, those who had known Bumpy's presence, his quiet authority, felt something different. The man who never raised his voice, the man who solved disputes with calm efficiency, was supposed to be dead. And yet, the absence of screams, the lack of bodies, the almost deliberate silence inside the building, whispered another possibility. Bumpy Johnson had never left. Within 2 hours, the first signs of retaliation began. Small, methodical strikes. Not gunfire, not chaos. Strategic disruption. Hargreaves' accountant arrived at his office to find all ledgers shredded, money misappropriated, and files marked with meticulous precision. Then came the note, slid under his polished oak door. He does not burn. One line. No flourish, no emotion, just certainty. By 2:14 a.m., Hargreaves' labor crews began receiving calls, anonymous, calm, and chilling. Permits were being frozen, supplies delayed, crews threatened with legal consequences if they continued working. The message was clear. Respect is mandatory, disrespect is systematic, predictable, and unrelenting. Bumpy had not just survived, he had taken control. Police patrols checking the burned building found nothing beyond charred furniture and ash-stained floors. Every inspection confirmed their logs. Doors bolted, windows nailed. Smoke damage internal to the apartments indicated no one had exited through the conventional routes. Hargreaves' men, the ones who had sealed the fire trap, were baffled. Some refused to sleep that night, whispering about footprints and shadows they hadn't seen. Meanwhile, Harlem's community sensed the shift. Rumors circulated that Bumpy had emerged from the flames like a phantom, unseen, untouchable. Children on the stoops whispered about a man who walked through fire and left no mark. Tenants told stories of brief shadows in the smoke, moving calmly through stairwells, untouched by heat, leaving only consequence behind. By sunrise, the full extent of Bumpy's post-fire operations became apparent. Hargreaves' banker found all accounts frozen loans suddenly recalled. Suppliers refused to deliver materials without clearance from anonymous intermediaries who clearly acted with knowledge of Bumpy's plans. Financial ruin was not immediate but inevitable, like a slow burn. Each action was deliberate, precise, and impossible to trace directly back to a man the world had been told was dead. And yet, the most unsettling part for Hargreave was not the financial strangulation. It was the certainty documented, indisputable, unshakable that Bumpy Johnson had never left the burning building. Every sworn testimony, every fire inspector's note, every security record insisted on the impossible. He had been inside. By noon, Bumpy's calm, systematic revenge had begun to dismantle Hargreaves' empire. He was alive, he was present, and he had already begun executing consequences for every insult, every humiliation, every miscalculation that had led to the fire. Harlem had seen the fire. Harlem had seen the aftermath. But no one could explain the man in the flames or how a building designed to erase him had only amplified his legend. By the end of the day, one question hung in the air over Lenox Avenue and 131st Street. How do you kill a man who never leaves, and yet always returns? By late afternoon, the full weight of Bumpy Johnson's calculated vengeance began to fall on Victor Hargreave. The man who had believed wealth and influence could shield him from consequence now faced an invisible hand dismantling his empire piece by piece. Bumpy's retaliation was not chaotic, it was systematic, precise, and devastating in its scope. First came the financial unraveling. Hargreaves' accounts, once secure in midtown banks, were frozen. Every loan recalled. Investments vanished, redirected through intermediaries no one could trace. Even his insurance claims for the fire were stalled indefinitely, bureaucracy weaponized by a quiet menace. Within 6 hours, every asset Hargreave had counted on for liquidity was inaccessible. The message was brutal and clear. Disrespect has a cost, and Bumpy Johnson collects in full. Union interference followed. Hargreaves' labor crews, men who had feared his wrath for decades, suddenly received anonymous tips about violations, legal inspections, and unsafe conditions in his construction projects. Orders were delayed, supplies held, crews refused to work. What had been a perfectly timed, controlled operation the fire meant to erase Bumpy had become a blueprint for Hargreaves' own undoing. Then came the personal strikes. Hargreaves' brother, a man involved only nominally in the empire, was discovered in a Hudson River warehouse with 2 broken hands. A note pinned to his coat read, "Disrespect has consequences." No fingerprints, no suspects. Just the unmistakable signature of Bumpy's presence, methodical and psychological in its brutality. Hargreaves' office became a war zone of perception. Files shredded, ledgers missing, notes delivered without explanation. Each act delivered in calm precision, a silent demonstration that Bumpy had infiltrated a system built to secure wealth and power, leaving humiliation and fear in his wake. By 7 p.m., Hargreave was a man surrounded by chaos he could neither comprehend nor control. Bumpy's revenge was not random violence, it was calculated, smart, systematic. Every move destabilized Hargreaves' financial, social, and psychological standing. Orders executed with timing down to the minute, contractors delayed, suppliers threatened, accounts seized. The city's bureaucracy suddenly became an instrument of punishment. By midnight, Hargreave was effectively paralyzed, unable to act, unable to pay, unable to escape scrutiny. And yet, through all of it, Bumpy remained invisible. The city had witnessed the fire, believed in his death, and yet the architect of their chaos was alive, silent, untouchable. Harlem whispered his name not as a criminal, but as a protector enforcing the most basic rule: respect is law. The final, cruelly elegant stroke was symbolic violence. Each note left behind served as a lesson, a psychological hammer. A banker received the note, "He does not burn." A labor foreman found a blueprint with instructions for halting construction. "You work when he allows it. Hargreave received a letter summarizing the day's consequences, written in the same calm, deliberate hand. Every insult accounted for, every disrespect corrected. End of chapter. By the next morning, Victor Hargreave was a man hollowed out. His wealth remained on paper, but his power had evaporated. Allies disappeared. Contractors refused to answer calls. Banks ignored letters. The system he had believed would protect him had become his instrument of ruin. Harlem, meanwhile, had seen the outcome. No gunshots, no public scandal. Just order restored, respect enforced, and a legend solidified. Bumpy Johnson had turned the city's machinery against its most arrogant citizen, proving that true power was not in fire or wealth but in the precision of patience, the intelligence of action, and the ruthless enforcement of respect. By the time Hargreave realized he was cornered, it was too late. Every decision he had made to humiliate Bumpy had been reversed. Every asset he relied on to control others had been stripped. The man who never left the burning building had just systematically burned Hargreave's world to ashaun, done so without ever stepping into the spotlight. By the third day after the fire, Victor Hargreave was a man unraveling in slow motion. His empire, built on contracts, intimidation, and bureaucratic favor, had been hollowed out with surgical precision. Banks would no longer release funds. Contractors refused to touch his projects. Political allies avoided him as if proximity were contagious. Hargreave had always believed that fear and money were interchangeable. He now realized they were not. Bumpy Johnson had become the ghost in the machine. Not one person could place him, yet every action, the frozen accounts, the sabotaged projects, the personal humiliations bore his unmistakable signature. The final stage of retaliation required a personal confrontation, not violence, but an ultimatum delivered with the same calm efficiency that had marked his entire life. Through intermediaries, a meeting was arranged. A neutral location, Midtown Hotel. Hargreave arrived expecting to see a man desperate, disoriented, broken. Instead, he found only an empty chair. A single envelope lay on the table, heavy with the weight of inevitability. He opened it to find a note. You have two choices: correct the disrespect, or face the consequences of your arrogance. Time is yours to waste. Your decision is not mine to grant. There was no signature, no flourish, just the unmistakable certainty of a man who had already anticipated every possible response. Hargreave tried to bargain, threaten, bribe. Each attempt was anticipated, each countermeasure already in place. Contractors, suppliers, and even law enforcement had been preemptively briefed by Bumpy's unseen network. Every route to escape or retaliation had been blocked. Every option for leverage evaporated before it could be grasped. By 2:17 p.m., a weight of inevitability pressed on Hargreave. Bumpy Johnson was not present in body, but his influence was absolute. The ultimatum was not a plea, it was a statement of law enforced outside the courts. Hargreave's pride demanded one last gamble. He refused the terms. By the next morning, consequences manifested physically, socially, and financially. Hargreave's brother was found incapacitated once again, the same note pinned to his coat. 2 down, 6 to go. Vendors and contractors continued to delay projects indefinitely. Political connections evaporated. Banks closed doors. Orders were reversed. Investments liquidated. Every humiliation Hargreave had thought temporary became permanent. Bumpy Johnson never appeared to deliver a punch or a bullet. Every action was executed through strategy, foresight, and intimidation. The man who had been trapped in a burning building orchestrated destruction from the shadows with the precision of a chess master. Each piece moved exactly as planned, every consequence anticipated. Harlem whispered the story quickly. The fire had been a ruse, a distraction, a stage for the ultimate demonstration. Bumpy Johnson was alive, untouchable, and the arbiter of respect. The city knew. The man who never yelled, never panicked, and never left the building had made an entire empire crumble with nothing but intelligence, patience, and systematic action. And for Victor Hargreave, the message was now undeniable. Power without respect is temporary. Humiliation uncorrected is fatal. Silence, when observed by the right person, is far more dangerous than fury. By nightfall, Hargreave understood that he had lost more than money. He had lost control, influence, and dignity. And Bumpy Johnson, the man everyone believed dead, had delivered it all without ever stepping fully into the light. By the end of the week, Harlem had returned to its rhythm, but the echo of the fire and the unseen hand that followed it lingered like smoke in the streets. Victor Hargreave, once untouchable, now moved like a man haunted. His empire built from contracts, bribes, and intimidation had been reduced to a hollow shell. Buildings still stood, papers still existed, but the power they represented had vanished. Every handshake, every promise, every document he once relied on now carried the weight of inevitability. Bumpy Johnson had enforced respect, and Hargreave had failed to meet its terms. The aftermath was as psychological as it was material. Hargreave avoided the streets of Harlem, rarely answering calls, never attending social functions, and refusing even the most routine business meetings. His allies, once loyal, sensed the shift in the city's power structure. Contractors and labor crews who had feared him now whispered warnings to others: respect is enforced, and failure carries consequences. Banks refused loans, and insurers delayed claims indefinitely. Hargreave had become untouchable only in title, while his influence crumbled around him. Bumpy Johnson's methods were methodical: no gunfire, no public spectacle, no chaos. Just precision strikes, strategically delivered humiliation, and the psychological weight of knowing that every insult, every slight, had been accounted for. Notes continued to appear in key offices. He does not burn. 2 down, 6 to go. Order restored. Each message reinforced the lesson without exposing the hand that delivered it. Fire had been the opening act, but the real performance, the dismantling of Hargreave's power, played out in silence. Harlem, too, had witnessed the consequences. Residents understood that Bumpy was not a criminal but a protector, a man whose authority enforced balance. Disputes that might have escalated into violence now resolved quietly, as everyone understood the invisible law he represented. His legend grew not because he wielded weapons indiscriminately, but because his actions were precise, deliberate, and impossible to evade. The man who survived a burning building without leaving had become the arbiter of respect in the neighborhood he protected. Hargreave's social isolation became complete. Political allies distanced themselves. Business partners refused communication. His brother remained incapacitated, a permanent reminder pinned with the same cold precision that had begun the unraveling. Every attempt to regain power was met with preemptive intervention, orchestrated by Bumpy through his network of loyal associates. By the time Hargreave attempted to rebuild, the city had already realigned itself. The lines of influence were clear. Bumpy Johnson had established order where arrogance had created chaos, and yet, the most haunting detail remained unsolved. How had Bumpy survived the fire? Every record, every witness, every sworn statement confirmed the impossible. He had never left the building. Yet here he was, alive, executing consequences with surgical precision. The mystery remained locked in the records, in the whispers of Harlem streets, in the notes that arrived like clockwork. By the final hours of that week, Hargreave's world had shifted entirely. The man who believed he could humiliate without repercussion now understood the brutal truth. Disrespect, when observed by the right person, carries a cost. Silence is more dangerous than fury. And a burning building cannot contain a man who controls consequence itself. Harlem returned to normal, but in the quiet corners, behind locked doors and beneath stoops, the legend of Bumpy Johnson endured. A man who never left the flames had burned away arrogance, restored order, and left an indelible mark on the city. The story would circulate for decades, whispered as caution, as warning, as proof that power is temporary but respect enforced with precision lasts forever.